somebody is brave enough to volunteer, all you need to do is just raise your hand, and then Max will find and unmute you, and then we can have a chat and go. I'll jump in and find your site. I'm sure Max will give you a prize if you're brave enough to put your hand up and let us analyze your site.
We've got a hand up here. We've got Prue. Thank you, Prue. I'm just going to allow you to talk now. So you may be able to unmute your microphone and you should be able to have a conversation with Ken and I. Hello, Prue.
Hello.
Hi, Prue. How are you going?
Good. That was my entry.
Yes, excellent. And now, remind me, what was your intersection? I haven't marked the assignments yet. I had to flick through some.
Mine was a roundabout adjacent to a school with not much deflection.
Right.
And three legs on Regent Street in Caloundra.
Regent.
Yep, if you go to 32 Regent.
32 Regent Street.
Yep.
And is this a local roundabout there for you, Prue? Or
yes, this is just in my house.
Okay. And the school is where you drop your kids off or something?
Yes, that's right.
There you go. So you know all the ins and outs of this one.
I certainly do. I've actually done some, I think I did some traffic count some years ago from the treehouse. Unconventional.
That's not a bad setup.
I know.
Finally, all traffic counts for that interesting and engaging.
Right. I think I've got it here. I'm going to share my screen through and you can confirm we've found the right spot, hopefully.
That's it.
Okay, let's have a little explore just so everybody else can have a quick look. Oh, interesting little bike lane configurations there. Oh, turn around. Okay. Let's maybe jump up and just have a look from above here.
So that's the school in the northern, on that side. Yep, that's the.
Up there. Let's turn off some labels there so we get a better view. Okay. All right, Prue, let's yeah, so what do we got? We got a school up here, residential, yep. The rest of it?
Yep, residential, but we have a lot of community attractors to the west in terms of sports facilities and tennis courts, ovals, aquatic centre, and then the town centre is also to the south. There's also, just in that little residential area to the west of the school, there's some it's a place called Steps, and they have housing for people with disabilities. So you see a lot of people coming through here in wheelchairs and things as well.
Okay. All right. Okay, there's a good bit of background. What? No, no, we'll get to that. How did you go about thinking about exposure to crashes?
Exposure. There wasn't, in terms of actually reducing the volumes of the traffic volumes, there is some network planning in this area where they could actually provide another connection across to the west here. You can kind of see in a road reserve that is unformed. It's just near the tennis courts, actually. Yeah, so that can continue down into this intersection. So I know that there are some long-term plans to connect that intersection in, and it might mean taking out another leg of the intersection, but that would mean that you would reduce the traffic volumes on this street, yeah, which goes through the roundabout. And it's also, that's a split, the ovals for the primary school across the other side of that road as well. So that would mean you wouldn't have as much traffic going through the primary school. There is an underpass though connecting the two sides of the school, so children can go through the underpass. But yeah, that was one way to reduce exposure, would be to actually take some traffic off that road. Another way to reduce exposure could potentially be to put a crossing for pedestrians and cyclists up the road, which you can see there. there is, but those are both kind of up the hill. And yeah, this crossing here gets a lot of use. Not many people cross down at the roundabout there, but the other crossing on the other side of the school, I think to the east there, yeah, a lot of people don't walk up to this crossing, because it's up a hill and it involves another side road crossing, which the side road isn't very good either. Cars come quite quickly around there. So you get a lot of people crossing north-south here. Yeah.
Right.
Mhm.
Okay. So that's really excellent analysis there of exposure, because you're thinking through the numbers. What's influencing the numbers of vehicles in your sort of potential opening up that other route and moving some of the vehicles across that. And in terms of pedestrians crossing at the intersection, so moving them away, I suppose it creates this interesting dilemma in a safe system assessment. Often, if the scope of your project is sort of the intersection there, and exposure response for pedestrians is to move them up to here, I kind of always feel I should really then just almost extend the scope out to here, because I'm just moving them up the road. But the challenge is always how far do you extend the scope as you go. But yeah, changing the numbers is the key, as you've done.
Yeah.
So that's excellent. Okay, well, now let's talk about things that influence the likelihood of crashes.
So the likelihood, reducing the speed, so it's that will do consequences as well. But in this situation, so putting raised, so wombat crossings on each leg would lower the vehicle approach speeds and reduce the likelihood of vehicles crashing into each other, because it opens up time for them to be able to see each other. It also reduces the likelihood of drivers crashing into a pedestrian, because it opens up that time. We're also, because we have really inexperienced users here, and we do have wheelchair users, my judgment would be that it would reduce the likelihood of a crash, because we're putting the onus onto the more experienced road users to take responsibility for that. And yeah, we could also do some things with deflections, but they do have heavy vehicles come through here. So in terms of the deflection, we still need to get quite large vehicles through occasionally. So I think the wombats are the best idea for that, for managing the speed rather than the horizontal geometry.
Okay, so that's some really good points in there. So the presence of the pedestrians, and including those in wheelchairs that may have a little more of a challenge crossing the road and the like, would factor into a safe system assessment, or you could, if you wanted to, factor that in as increasing the likelihood of pedestrian crashes, as you sort of did there. So it's a really good example there of that broad thinking about how we get to these likelihood scores. We haven't scored them yet, but we do eventually put a score to that likelihood. So that's a really, really good one. And then, as you said, speed's a big influencer in likelihood and severity. The definition there of crossing point priority, I think, is a good one, and the raising of the crossing point to get better view of the pedestrians and ensure that speeds down is a really, really good one for likelihood and also severity. The challenge with often the pedestrian crossings at grade like this one, with that, this one doesn't, I'm going to assume is not raised yet. We don't tend to see as good safety benefits out of this, and in fact, in a lot of cases, we see it go the other way, don't we? It's where we still retain the high speed of the vehicle. Yes, the pedestrians have priority, but when incidents happen, they're at high speed with pedestrians, and that's pretty bad. So I really, really love the idea of raising these. Okay, so
we could also separate the cyclists too. There's some opportunities. I think the raising the crossings would allow some cyclists, if they're turning, to take the centre of the lane, but we could also put a cut through for the left turning cyclists in this situation and put them on the other side of that island. Could be an opportunity.
back here.
Yeah, cut through the island and provide a separated.
Yeah, I think that absolutely, that would be brilliant. I mean, it's almost started, hasn't it, with a channel there? But what do you think that would influence in terms of exposure or likelihood or severity?
Well, it's likelihood, I think.
I would go likelihood. I mean, you could be tempted to say exposure, but I feel that the cyclists are so. And if we really just hone the scope of the assessment to like this section, then you could almost argue exposure. But because we're still having cyclists in all these other areas, this just lessens the likelihood they don't have to come out into this circulating bit and around here they'll get a free run through.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about severity now. What things do you think are influencing the severity of crashes?
The geometry of the roundabout. So you can, if we're looking where we are at the moment, you can see that vehicles have minimal deflection to go straight ahead. I'm going to say straight ahead there. It's more straight ahead than left, really. And it's the same on the other side for the vehicles approaching here. That's really almost a straight through as well. So by raising the platforms, we can really lower those speeds as part of a compensation for what the deflection's not doing. But we could also do some modifications to the traffic islands.
Yes. Yep. So it's really the speed there, isn't it, that you're honing in on, and the geometry influencing the speed, and speed's so critical in our severity. So that's a really good one as well. In terms of roadside hazards, so we analyze, even in an intersection like this, we'd look at what are the roadside hazards, how do they influence the likelihood of, well, the geometry may influence the likelihood of run-off road, but the severity would be influenced by the rigidity or frangibility or different roadside hazards. So we've got some fixed hazards. Obviously, I think the raised platforms would even help out in that situation as well, due to the reduced speed through the intersection, which may be a potential loss of control. If they have to navigate that vertical deflection, they'll slow down, less likely to lose control.
Yeah. So what do we do about things like trees in an urban environment like this? Is it ever encouraged to remove trees?
In a safe system assessment?
Yeah, in this very urban environment where you have pedestrians as well, and the benefits of shade. And
yeah, so that's I mean, it's all an extremely important sort of transport consideration and environment. In a safe system assessment, we don't get into that.
Okay.
That's outside the scope of the safe system assessment, and I think it's important we're upfront with the client on that. We talk to them about their many challenges of any project. They'll have environmental, they'll have cultural heritage challenges, they'll have community expectation challenges. We can talk to them a bit about that at the start to ensure that we're on the same page. And if they were to tell us, the trees must stay, or they want to get rid of the trees or the like, we can incorporate that thinking into our recommendations in the safe system assessment, but we really don't want to delve into trying to, expand this out to a multi-criteria assessment covering off environment, cultural heritage, and all of those things.
Yep.
But yeah, as I say, like I wouldn't personally in this be recommending sort of removal of trees in these sorts of environments, not necessarily just because of, I like trees and I like these sorts of areas. I just don't, with those other features that you've mentioned, the need to do that the severity of crash will be so low for runoff road because of the low speeds. It's a win-win, really. We don't need to do that. It's not going to help our scores in any sort of meaningful way. Sorry, Fred. Okay. Well, that was a wonderful intersection analysis, and I really like the way Prue was thinking there through quite systematically through the exposure, the likelihood and severity, and identifying that some things that can influence speed can influence the likelihood and exposure. And in a safe system assessment, when we get to the next step, which is doing the full safe system assessment, the first thing you do is sort of analyze it as it is, just completely as it is, and you start to list all of the factors that you see that influence the likelihood of a crash. So in this situation, I'd be also dot pointing down things that can, improve things. So there appears to be lighting. We've got some, I would say, decent line marking, delineation, signage, and that these things are all reducing the likelihood of crashes. We have don't have pedestrians walking on the road, so there are some pedestrian facilities there. We could look at things even like the presence or not of tactile ground surface indicators, the alignment of pedestrian crossing facilities. So a lot of the stuff as a road safety auditor, you delve into in a lot of detail. And you're noting all of the school speed zone and its presence and things like that. And then in the severity, talking about all those, I think we mentioned most of them. The existing speed Prue really did well in the geometry, the presence of fixed hazards, the vulnerability of road users as well. So you can, look not only at their ability to cognitively process the crossing arrangement, and roundabouts are very sort of challenging from a cognitive perspective for pedestrians to cross, because there's a lot of legs to look at, and the crossing task isn't simple. And you can sort of analyze, have you got older road users, younger road users, people with challenges in processing that information, but you can also look at their physical vulnerability and factor that in. If you do have a lot of, kids are going to be a bit more vulnerable, old people are a lot more vulnerable, and so you could sort of factor a little bit of that into your severity. Also the presence of heavy vehicles and the percentage of heavy vehicles that are going to make things a little bit more severe. Anything else to add on this one, Prue?
I think that's it for the moment. There are no pedestrian crossings on the roundabout, but there's a significant number of pedestrians who use the roundabout. So it's definitely a desire line.
Yeah. So there's that's actually a crossover driveway, is it? I thought that was like a little pedestrian a pram ramp, but it wouldn't go anywhere. Yeah.
We get a lot of mobility scooters coming through the roundabout like a vehicle, and then some mobility scooters cross across on that hashed area as well. So, and it's interesting watching the way the people in mobility scooters have to kind of turn their scooter towards the traffic to be able to see the traffic, and then they have to turn back to go in the direction they're traveling. So that's quite interesting to watch.
Well, factoring that in I would certainly factor presence of those road users into the likelihood factor of pedestrian crashes, and I would just classify them as pedestrians.
Yeah.
In a safe system assessment, even though they're sort of slightly, it's an odd use of the term pedestrian, but we do sort of tend to categorize that in that way.
Yeah.
Wonderful. That was really good, Prue. Thank you very much for that. Max, what do you say? Do we have time to have a look at another one if somebody wanted to?
Yeah, we can certainly allow for that. If anyone else wants to pop their hand up, but thank you very much, Prue, for being the first to offer your site to investigate. You did a great job. Thanks, Prue. Your prize coming your way.
Yeah, anybody else want to put their hand up?
We've got Sujith.
Okay.
Oh, just disappeared. Sorry, I'll try and allow them to join the conversation. Hello.
Hey, hello.
How are you?
Very good.
That's
Now,
Right.
This is a weird intersection next to near my home. It's in front of a market, and there's a lot of pedestrians. And there is 3 intersections close to each other, probably within 150 meters. And there are a lot of turning movement, and we can see people are almost mostly confused when they reach to the intersection where they have to take left or right.
what's the intersection? What's the road?
It's in front of the Dandenong market. I have sent the link in the, I don't know if I can put the link in the chat. Let me try that.
Yeah, you can send the link in the chat. That'd be fine.
Yeah.
So just outside Dandenong Market, is it?
Yeah, just in front of it.
Is it the well, let's just have a look.
There's something like a roundabout.
Oh yeah, I think I know the one. Let's just look here.
Yeah, I'll put it in the chat. Let me see.
Or is it this?
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So
let's just start with a bit of aerial imagery. Look at it's all happening here, isn't it? So
Yeah.
immediately we can tell the exposure here is a little higher than Prue's site, at least for vehicles. We don't know the pedestrians, but carry on. What are you thinking there? Tell us a little bit more. We've got Dandenong Market here.
That's right. Yeah, there's the Dandenong Market there, and the Princess Highway going south to north, and the Clove Street coming from the east to west. But basically, it's terminating at the Princess Highway. It's the most of the traffic will be either turning right or turning left. It's very few traffic going straight ahead. They will be the only few number of traffic would be intending to go to the streets or street shops right opposites to the Princess Highway, to the opposite to the Dandenong Market. But most of the traffic would be intending to turn right to the Princess Highway or turn left to the Princess Highway.
Mm-hmm.
And the closed street is a 60-kilometer speed. If you zoom out, you can see it's a very straight section of road, all coming in 60-kilometer speed. And it's a downhill when they come from the previous intersection to the market intersection. So it's a downhill through there. So people always tend to accelerate down that when they come down from that downhill. Another thing, the number of intersections I was talking about those 3 intersections there. One that's giving entrance. Yeah, yeah, that's one intersection. Yeah, that's like, let's take from the Princess Highway on the left. That's one intersection. Second one is at the roundabout kind of thing, but it's not really a roundabout. That intersection there, and there's a pedestrian crossing right after that. That's the one. And if you go further to the right, there is another intersection. Yeah. So when people come down this street on a 60-kilometer speed, to the other, when you turn to the other side, you can always see people walking around. I would say there are a lot of pedestrian facilities as well. But once you come down to this point, you just finish one signal, you just accelerate, but you're still in a slower speed. You came to another signal. This is a red and green signal. There is no, it's only a stop signal. There's red and amber, that's it. There is no green. So you just accelerate when there is no green or no red.
Yep.
And then soon as you accelerate, you are at the next intersection. So you don't expect a give way on a main line unless you perceive this as a roundabout. But the alignment of the road is not like a roundabout. It's more like a straight road itself, but you have to give way to the oncoming traffic from the right. And we can see there are a lot of traffic from the right. All the traffic is coming from the Dandenong market, and also people taking U-turn from this service road. All of them will be coming through this roundabout. And so we have to always expect some cars on this roundabout. And if someone new to this area, they won't be really aware of this, and they will be coming on a 60 km/h if they are not really stopped by a red light before that. They will be meeting this car on the roundabout on a surprise. And as soon as they reach here, they have to make a decision. If they haven't made a decision by the time they reach here, like they might want to go to the left, or they might want to go to right. But like if they by mistake ended up on a wrong lane, they have to traverse a long distance to reach till the left, or they might, like if they wanted to go straight, they might end up in the right turn lane.
Yeah.
So we can always see a chaos there. People are moving left and right. Yeah, this is a bit of a background on this.
Yeah, it's good background. You've done very well there, setting the scene. And so obviously the traffic engineers and the designers elected with the dropout signal here to try to minimize that confusion. Because if they'd had a normal set of signals and had a green light, it would be very
chaotic,
confusing to have a green light and then a give way within 10 meters. So they've tried to minimize the confusion there, but I can very much see your point of the fact that it is, I would guess this used to be a larger roundabout facility, and then for the addition of a second right turn lane, it was cut down, cut back in at some point back in the day. So, okay, well, let's break this down a little bit into exposure, some exposure factors, some likelihood factors, and some severity factors. What about exposure? What things are influencing exposure to crashes at these number of intersections, really? Number of intersections and the number of traffic as well. It's a very busy area. This busy area is introduced all of a sudden. It would, like if you're coming from the closed street, it would be a very calm driving experience, and all of a sudden it gets very busy right in front of the market, and it's a lot of turning movements are happening, a lot of cars. So basically I would say the volume is high and the turning movements are high. And there are a lot of pedestrians as well, but the good thing is there are a lot of pedestrian crossing facility here, but still the community is such that they don't really follow the rules much, so you can still see pedestrian crossing here and there as well. So the presence of the pedestrian crossings, what do you think that influences? Exposure, likelihood, or severity? I would say it just added a bit more confusion to the driver, but it's actually good for reducing the exposure to pedestrians. It's a relevant thing there, and we need a pedestrian crossing there. I think you're right. I mean, it's a good pedestrian crossing. There's eye line from the car park and there. There's a plaza opposite to the market as well. So there's a big. If you go opposite to the market, that's a shopping complex. It's a plaza. So there's a bit of a
hangout area, not to that side, straight opposite. If you come down, yeah, that way,
Right.
yeah, that's a big plaza as well. So people travel from the other side to this side. So that pedestrian crossing is very relevant there.
Yeah. So the presence of the pedestrian crossing in a safe system assessment, we would allocate that into the likelihood reduction, because it is going to tell the vehicles when to stop and give the pedestrians a go. Now, you've already made a point that you see a lot of people maybe not utilizing those or crossing at other locations or crossing. That could be factored into your likelihood as well, if it's not good use of the facilities. But their presence is reducing the likelihood of pedestrian crashes. I think you already mentioned a couple of things that influence the likelihood of vehicle crashes, like this this geometry, the straight through geometry here.
Yeah.
And the give way there. Interesting little bus stop bypass arrangement there. That's a neat little one. I'd have to ponder that for a while. What any other things influencing likelihood of crashes that you thought of?
No, it's like once the drivers enter the state of confusion, we don't know what they're gonna do. So we can see a lot of confused movements.
Yeah,
so random movements. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of conflict points, a lot of complexity, and a really sort of challenging environment to navigate, and that does have the potential to increase the likelihood of crashes. Also the speed you mentioned, the downhill,
Yes.
the speed is going to influence the likelihood of crashes as well. So now we're getting speed and confusion, or confusing, difficult areas is not usually a good mix. What about severity of crashes?
What I have observed is it's not major crashes, it's side swipe crashes and all. But there are chances of a major crash, like the bullets to the side type crash at the roundabout.
Yep.
That's one that could be something that could lead to be very serious or severe, because the guys coming from the roundabout, they are expecting the others to give way to them, but
yes,
the guys coming from the closed street are not expecting someone to come from the side. Yeah.
So that's an interesting one. And as we did before, we'd be able to look a little bit at what are the angles of that crash. And we get a little bit of a reverse curve in here, which is going to help out a little bit, maybe slow vehicles a little bit, maybe give us a bit more of an angle. But you're right, it then sort of straightens out. So we wouldn't want this more than sort of your 50, 60 kilometer per hour speed, conflict point speed here, just for that collision. The pedestrians obviously crossing would be, we would want that down around the 20 kilometer, maybe up to 30 kilometer per hour around that conflict point. What about bicycles? Are there any bicycles that use this route? Do you see any when you're out there?
Yeah, there used to be bicycles as well.
Are there any facilities for bike riders?
No, they use the same pedestrian facility. They drive through the sidewalk, through the footpath.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. So again, another good part of a safe system assessment is that we are forced to look at cyclists, motorcyclists, pedestrians, and then the variety of passenger vehicle related potential crashes there. We do have another category in that safe system assessment, which we'll talk to you about shortly. And we may include things like buses in those, or other unique features. And so the severity of crashes in this one, that speed is going to be important. As you said, angle of crashes, and then presence of the vulnerable road users. Interestingly, in this one, I would, without knowing the area well, I sort of know the area, I'd say we'd have a lot of passenger vehicle death and serious injury up here at this intersection. And I'd say the vulnerable road users would all be, at most risk here. And this one probably, again, a bit of a combination because of the proximity to all of them. There'd be a higher pedestrian movement.
Yeah, fortunately, fortunately, that strip of Princess Highway is just 40 kilometer, where your mouse point is at the moment. Not the not that side. The downside is 40 kilometer. But the closed straight is 60 kilometers still. So so since this Princess Highway is 40 kilometers, it kind of eases people when they're turning and all. But actually the problem is on closed straight. The Princess Highway is still on a comfortable place to drive, but the closed straight is, I always think twice if I have to go there.
Yeah. Okay, another really good example there, and lots and lots of factors in this, and we've heard quite a few of them there. But in a safe system assessment, there would be just lists and lists of things, things like the line marking, the signage, the lighting. You could even do the orientation of the sun, behavior of the pedestrians, the behavior of the drivers, factoring into likelihoods factors, the presence of fixed hazards, the vegetation and sightline challenges potentially. So you're looking through quite a raft of things and just attributing them to altering the exposure or the likelihood or the severity. So what do you think could be changed?
I think there should be a schematic sign rather than a descriptive sign. If you go down somewhere in the closed street, somewhere there, or maybe before that in the section itself, somewhere there, we should have a there is a descriptive sign, a signboard saying that whoever wants to turn should turn to the left or right or something like that. But I haven't really read that. I'm sure no one have read that. But if the signboard is a bit more schematic, like the left turn takes you to Noble Park, the right, like you can see there's a descriptive signboard there. But if you read that, you will hit someone or some pedestrians. Like we won't get time to read all those things. Melbourne via Princess Highway, right turn only. But it's better to write that on the pavement or have a schematic signboard and reduce the speed to 40.
So let's take the sign one. Is that going to influence the exposure, the likelihood, or the severity? If we had a better sign.
If it's a better sign, I would think it would reduce the driver confusion. So I would say it will reduce the likelihood. The exposure would remain the same.
Yes, the exposure would remain the same. The severity would likely remain the same because it's not influencing the speed or the angle or these sorts of things. It's hopefully just getting people in the right lane, correct lane, and being a little bit less confused, exactly as you said. In terms of the speed, what would that influence? The speed limit?
It would reduce the severity.
Severity and probably likelihood as well. I'm always realistic in what a speed limit reduction in its own right can do. It can be a very powerful, helpful tool. I do also like to see it supplemented with physical treatments to ensure that we get that lower speed, but it certainly would help. Okay.
It will ease off all the drivers coming through there. So
any other ideas?
Maybe to make that roundabout as a stop line rather than give way, like the U-turners should give way to the main roads. But I don't know, from the traffic point of view, it might affect the circulation of the whole area. Maybe it would choke up the whole intersection. This probably needs to be studied further. If we make the U-turn as a stop condition to the main line. So I think the reason we put yield to the main line is main line have a lot more storage than the U-turn. So if we put a stop line there, it might choke up the whole intersection.
Yeah, because it would come out and then
Yeah.
down. So I can see from a traffic perspective why they've, exactly as you've said, probably done it. But I think, you could probably get some more alterations there to reduce the likelihood of crashes. No, this is very good. I wonder if we could utilize this intersection here as a opportunity to gateway into this confusing, challenging area with a lot of our pedestrian desire, and raise this intersection, thereby sort of anybody coming down the hill quickly would be, I sort of call it gatewaying. They would encounter this to break up their straight, long, fast run, slow down, and get into this area to recognize this is now a sort of significantly different environment compared to what they'd been going through here. Hopefully reduce the likelihood and severity of crashes there. Excellent analysis. Well done. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That was great, Max.
Excellent work, and it's just shows the varied applications of these safe system assessments. It's not one type of intersection, not one type of mid-block you apply it to. We've seen two very different examples there of where a safe system assessment could be done, and it's still valid for each. So thank you very much for sharing, guys.
Yeah, I was just pondering how I would go about safe system assessing those three intersections. I'd probably break them potentially into three distinct sort of assessment components, and look at each sort of in isolation, and then try to combine later down the track if I needed to. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Good to have a bit of interaction and some a little dive into Queensland, and then a little dive into Victoria. But we're going to do a little bit of chatting about vulnerable road users to give us that final sort of rounded piece that we can go and start doing a mock safe system assessment after the end of next module. But if you didn't yet get to your assignment, almost all of you did, and well done on getting to that, and they'll be marked very shortly. But if you didn't manage to get to that, please do that. It's really valuable to get your feedback on that before you jump into your actual safe system assessment at the end of next module. So, anything you don't quite have your head around, you're able to rectify before doing too much further work. I'm just going to share my screen here, and I'll swap the presenter view there. I did, as I say, I had to flick through some of your assignments. I haven't marked them yet, but there were just a couple of things that I wanted to bring up. We've had most people seem to do pretty well in the likelihood and severity aspects, and differentiating those two. What influences likelihood, what influences severity. We had a little bit of confusion on exposure, and that's understandable. It's a little bit hard often to get our head around extracting exposure out from likelihood in a risk assessment perspective, because it's not a common thing that is done. But let me sort of remind you just briefly, we've got the example here of sort of blocking the intersection off, closing an intersection, stops the vehicles going through there, reduces the number of vehicles being exposed to this level crossing in this one. And also the potential to completely separate a vulnerable road user so they're not exposed to crashes with passenger vehicles. So these completely separated shared park or cycleway facilities. They're sort of two examples of exposure. But I think it also helps if I read you a definition out of Austroads, the Safe System Assessment Framework. This refers to road users in what numbers are using the road and thus exposed to a potential crash. the key here is the measure of exposures include AADT, side road traffic volumes, number of motorcyclists, cyclists, and pedestrians. So it's numbers, it's numbers. You know, how do we influence the numbers of road users exposed to that crash? And because this is a fairly, it's a fairly, what would I say, new challenging area, some of the scoring and how you allocate things, we wanted to try and ensure consistency across industry. And we've got the Austroad Safe System Assessment Framework. There's some jurisdictional guidance, at least from Victoria, from South Australia, and Queensland's got a few little bits and pieces ticking along as well. But there are still quite a number of gaps or things that people haven't quite clarified. We've sort of filled that gap for the moment with some fact sheets, scoring fact sheets, and we've made those available in your on your memory stick and in Moodle. So you'll be able to flick to those if you are scratching your head on a few things there, like when does a bike facility influence? So when would we allocate it to exposure or likelihood or severity? So a bike lane, for example, is likelihood because vehicles can easily still enter that lane, they're distracted or asleep or these sorts of things. But then if we put maybe a back-to-back curbing there, does that change it from exposure? From likelihood to exposure? I'd probably still say no, because that's a mountable curb type and the vehicle could still get in there. It's less likely to, again, it's something sort of a little bit physical, but not completely. But if you put a continuous barrier system there, I'm probably moving it now to exposure, except for thinking about all the different crossing roads that they're going to have to get. So anyway, you can have a flick through those fact sheets. They may be more helpful when you get into actually scoring some of the stuff you're looking at, but that's the next step. You've done a really good job in starting to get your head around categorizing. What I did like to see was that a lot of people are doing great analysis at the intersections, spotting different deficiencies, things that are going on out there, looking intensely at different parts. So that was really good. And we're just going to help you continue to categorize and then start to score these and get end products of safe system alignment. But do jump in as per usual with any questions or comments as we go. Max is behind the scenes answering and feeding me any questions or comments as we go. We're going to talk this session about movement and place, or some people would call it blink and place, but movement and place. And we're going to relate it to safe system thinking. And this is a really important aspect of, I suppose, helping you in a safe system assessment come up with meaningful, helpful recommendations. But I'll get into that in more detail. We want to identify key characteristics for vulnerable road users, so that's pedestrian, cyclists, and motorcyclists that align highly with safe system principles, and obviously things that don't, and categorize key risk factors for vulnerable road users into our favorite: exposure, likelihood, and severity. Don't forget to count your wallies, of course. So let's talk about movement and place. And I will admit now I'm going to talk about movement in place in a very simplistic manner. And probably some of you have a huge amount of knowledge of the idea of movement in place as a strategic transport planning way of thinking. But we just need to make sure everybody's generally got this concept in their mind. What I'm going to do is utilize this diagram. And there are now many different movement and place diagrams and jurisdiction shaping it in slightly different ways. At a general sort of concept level, I'm going to run with this one, which shows there a matrix of movement on the y-axis and place there on the x-axis. So place is an acknowledgement that roads and streets do more than just move people and goods through it. Now, maybe they originally sort of evolved, you know, or were built to move stuff along there, but we have built place around them, that feeling of place, and that's sort of connectivity with the community, trade, social interaction. All of these things we categorize as place value. And movement is still that movement of people and goods, and it's not necessarily movement of people and goods in cars or trucks. It could be on bicycle, or it could be walking. So it's just the movement function versus the place function, which is the congregating, hanging out, more socializing, trading, yeah, and the like. And what we really do at this simplistic level is to say that a road or street can have a combination of function in terms of movement and place, and we can start to categorize those. And so we can look at sort of very simple things of like an area that is actually all movement function, which could be a motorway, for example. We do not want people congregating, trading, socializing, interacting on the motorway. It is solely for the movement of people and goods, in this case, in passenger vehicles. We could have in this category out here as well a cycleway, for example, which is solely for the movement of cyclists through it. We don't want people congregating or trading or interacting and, you know, socializing on the cycleway either. That's the motorway for bikes. Down the other end, right at the other extreme here, we have these places for people. And these are malls or malls where people will you know, hang out. It was a road or street at some point and may very occasionally operate as that function for one reason or another, but it is very much a place for people. And then, of course, you get your other categories there, and you can see down where you start to have lesser place value. We've got local streets and low movement, that through function. We call those in our local streets category. The major arterial roads, movement corridors, and then we have what is referred to as, in this Sydney planning framework, as vibrant streets. And those are the ones where you've got high place value and high movement function, and they're usually your high streets and the like, and they're actually very challenging to deal with. But the reason we want to categorize a road in a safe system assessment, or more accurately, why we ask our clients and say, well, what is the movement of place categorization? What do you know, where does the road sit in this framework? What are you trying to achieve with this from a planning perspective? Is actually not to alter our scores, because our scores are our scores. Our scores are what is there and how well does it align with safe system principles? What are you planning to build and how well does that align with safe system principles? Okay. But where this comes into play in a big way is then that we make some recommendations for them to improve their design. Now, we can achieve high alignment with safe system principles in a variety of ways. And some of them are going to be very conducive to making it far more motorway related and actively reducing the place. Some of them, the ways we do it, will be far more increasing the place value and potentially decreasing the movement function of it. We want them to tell us what their strategic planning objectives are. It's a little like sort of the chat with Prue there of about the trees and then other factors. Okay, we're just doing the safe system thinking, but we can help you get to high alignment with safe system principles in a variety of ways, depending on your aspirations for that road or street. So it's all about getting meaningful, helpful recommendations to get more alignment with safe system principles. So let's play that out. Let's play that out a little bit with some hypothetical scenarios, and I'll show you some sort of examples. The places for people, it's been fun to watch the sort of tactical urbanism going on with COVID, and then some routes that were probably more vibrant street related got pulled into more place for people related areas, which was fun to watch with the planter boxes coming in, or the the different what are the street dining bits and pieces going on. So that's been interesting to watch. But let's do a little exercise now. And Max, I think it'll be time for us to do this exercise, but also have a stretch break and fill up the water and coffee. So we'll give people a good sort of 5 or 6 minutes to think about this after I explain it, if that's all right.
Yep, sounds good.
Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to look at this artistic impression of a road or a street. And I'm going to tell you now that we want this as a very strong place for people. Okay, that is our strategic planning objectives under movement in place, or link in place, or one network framework, or whatever you call it in your jurisdiction, is this place for people, high place value and low, it's got low movement function requirements. So what I want you to do is have a think about what we've got there and how we could get better alignment with safe system principles. So make it safe, but also to make it more of a place for people. Okay. And when you do that, and you're going to think of some ideas of changes or things that you want to do. I'm not going to budget limit you. I'm not going to put any of those other constraints on you. I'm just going to say, tell us things that are changes that make it more of a place for people, make it better aligned with safe system principles. And when you do that, I want you to just put an E for exposure, an L for likelihood, and S for severity. So if you make any changes, tell me, if you say, improve the lighting, okay? So probably not going to have major changes on the movement in place function of it, but I'm using it as an example. It's not something that, you might be putting in there, but you say, alter the lighting, and L for likelihood. You will influence the likelihood of crashes. But no, I want you to look for things that are going to really enhance the place value of this area, recognizing it doesn't have a major movement function. So I'm going to give you five minutes on that. So just jot a few ideas down, put exposure, likelihood, or severity with them. Have a stretch, fill your water up, and we'll get back to it in 5 minutes. Okay, we'll give it another 30 seconds just if people are writing their last ideas. Okay. Well, I've seen some fantastic ideas coming in here, Max. This is really good to see, and people doing really well at popping in their exposure likelihood and severity.
That's right. It's all pairing up quite nicely, Ken.
Yeah. Well, I might just run through and talk to a few of the points that came in, and I think certainly won't be able to get to each one, but I do like this. So some people looking at removing the car parking and utilizing that space to widen footpaths, influencing by the likelihood and severity there. I'd say probably likelihood there, unless we had other features to slow speeds. And reduce reduce speeds, be that speed limit. So yes, likelihood and severity. So we've got lots of people focusing on reducing the speed, which is really wonderful to see. I mean, these places for people, if there are vehicles, we want the speed significantly down. So bollards along the road to separate vehicles and pedestrians without restricting pedestrian movement. Tend to probably put that into a likelihood reduction, assuming that the pedestrians are still going to be crossing the road, so they are exposed to vehicle crashes there. They're probably not exposed to the vehicle leaving the road and hitting them, but as they cross. So we've got to think about all the ways that pedestrians could be exposed to those crashes. But a good idea nonetheless. Some people wanting to make this a one-way street. And that's an interesting one to understand whether it's exposure, likelihood, or severity. Most people in this group have put it into exposure. And I believe they've probably done that under the assumption that they will reduce the vehicle numbers through this area, thus reducing the exposure. And if that's the case, yes. But I'd always look at the traffic modeling on that. If you're creating sort of then a circulating a multi-lane one way, you've probably got the same exposure. You've maybe reduced the likelihood because it's an easier crossing maneuver or the like. But yeah, it's all about the volume in that exposure. So removing the parking certainly will open up sight lines, so easier to cross. Always be aware, though, that can widen the road and speeds can increase of passenger vehicles as a result, thus pulling back increasing the likelihood and severity there from that perspective. So always complementing with some other treatments if you're going to do that to keep speeds down or reduce them even further. So a couple of features that are popping up, and it really depends. It would require more analysis of the movement of place categorization, a bit more thinking around that to understand whether they're or not. But they're slightly skewed to more movement corridors than they are places for people. And they're things like the median strip with pedestrian refuge, which certainly would improve alignment with safe system principles, but often creates more. Well, actually, no. I was going to say it's an interesting one. It depends how it's done. But when we start to sort of designate crossing points, we are sort of encouraging that this is a road for cars and pedestrians. You can use this little bit to cross. Now, in a really true sort of place for people style area, we really want it as cars are the very odd ones out, and the whole area is pedestrian, like a shared zone, as others mentioned. But as it creeps up in terms of the movement requirements, that's when you start to get into these sorts of features. But certainly raised treatments to slow vehicles are really exciting. And one in here that I particularly spotted and liked, which was simply just to ban cars and service vehicles only. When you have a place for people, it's pretty much the first question you should be asking is, can we block it off to vehicles? Now, obviously, a lot of our network, we cannot do that because of one reason or another, but it's a really wonderful thing to start with when you have anything in that category. What else have I got here? Yeah, people wanting to alter the road surface to change it up there to reduce speeds and thus the likelihood and severity of crashes. Thinking about also the challenges of some road users crossing those areas, but I'm sure that can be worked out in the design. And lots of people, yeah, thinking about shared zones and very low speed spaces, and that's all wonderful stuff for encouraging these places for people. So well done. Let's have a look at a little artistic impression on it, and I think it's pretty good what they've done, but I think there could be some alterations. So again, artistic impression, so don't take too much out of it. But the idea being, look, you've got such a now a more attractive place to play, to hang out, and this must have a little bit of movement function because I've still kept it open. As I said before, I wouldn't necessarily have a crossing point like this. I'd try to, as many of you did, make this all a shared zone area, but as your movement requirement increases, it would be appropriate to have that. But you can see immediately there that it's a much better place for people, and you can intuitively see it's going to be lower speed, lower severity of crashes, lower likelihood of crashes as well, and probably lower vehicle volumes. As that goes up, as the movement requirement goes up, this is where we get more actively into that idea of separation, and this is much more movement orientated, but it still retains a lot of place value. And this is sort of starting to get us up into these vibrant streets categories, but probably not quite there yet. But you see there the separated bicycle facilities, crossing points, the roadways for public transport and vehicle use as well. But still a very nice place to play, to hang out, to have a coffee, to trade and the like. And you really wouldn't want to be seeing places for people anything above 30 kilometers an hour. It's really pushing your boundaries of what a place for people should be operating at. They really are slower, the much slower areas. Local streets are an interesting one. We would categorize them with low place value. Now, little tip, if you're doing the community consultation with the local residents, tell them that we believe your street has low place value. That I'd particularly like to hear that, because we're thinking about it from the holistic context of the entire transport network, the whole strategic, roads and streets network. But yeah, we also have low movement function. And when you get yourself in these sorts of categories, the ability to lower speed significantly is within what you can do and appropriate, due to the fact that we don't have that movement requirement. admittedly, we don't have the place value, but we need to get our safe system alignment up, and utilizing speed reductions as the technique to do that is sort of the appropriate one in these local street environments, using raised crossing points as example here, or slow speeds, or blocking off rat runs, like streets where people are going through. So lots of ways we can alter these road environments. We do not need to be getting vehicles through there at any speed. And so, another artistic impression, which I won't spend time on, is fairly similar to the other one in this artistic sort of style, but with that idea that you provide some wider and slightly higher speed movement through these areas, but you also manage to get some more place value out of it as an extra benefit. But let's jump to vibrant streets, because that's a harder category. And again, I'll get you to do a little bit of thinking around this. The vibrant streets one, really is challenging due to that fact that everything's a priority. And I worked on an Austroads project called Safe System for Mixed Use Arterial, Safe System Infrastructure for Mixed Use Arterials. And it is really that challenge that you find everything seems to be a priority on these roads. It's a traffic priority route. It's a pedestrian priority area. It's a priority bicycle route. It's the public transport route. And everything seems to be of high importance. So the first thing I do with a group, often when safe system assessing, is to ask, can we get an indication of it, whether you'd like it to be more place for people, or you'd like it to be more movement corridor, just to try to a little bit more of an indication of how we can operate this area. But sometimes you don't get that. And so we are now in this situation where we're trying to create higher alignment with safe system principles, recognizing this plays a movement requirement for people and goods in whatever form we can move them in, and it has a high place requirement, and we need to try to operate this with high alignment with safe system principles. So let's play that out in an exercise, shall we? Actually, before I do that, Max, I'll just check it. Do I need to deal with anything?
No, all good. We can hop into the exercise.
Thank you. So here we go. We've got our artistic impression back again, and we can see there we've got the major arterial running through the town, the big high street or whatever it is. Probably used to back in the day be the main highway to the other city, and then the shops built up around it, and the pubs and the cafes and the shops and everything. And now we've got lots of people and the like. So we want to make it high place value, high movement corridor. We currently have some sort of pedestrian overpass style facility, some fencing up to try to stop pedestrians crossing, 70 km/h speed limit, lots of vehicles and some cyclists mixing in there as well. So again, let's just do that exercise. I'll give you less time this time. Just pop down a few little ideas. How do we alter this road environment to get better alignment with safe system principles, to make it safer by altering the exposure, the likelihood, and or the severity? So what are we going to change? But acknowledging we want to make this high place value and high movement and a high movement corridor. So pop your ideas down, pop in brackets E or an L or an S. I'll give you 2 minutes on this one. Okay, again, seeing some really great input from people here. So we've got people wanting to replace service roads with segregated cycle paths and wider footways. Aaron's got an interesting idea there, and I didn't budget limit anybody to underground all the traffic and completely remove all exposure, thus leaving us the ability to do whatever we want with that area. And that would be the ultimate, wouldn't it? I mean, we would get extremely high alignment with safe system principles. We would have good movement potential through there, and we would be able to create a high place value. And so in theory, that's a wonderful thing to look at. Obviously, some big costs associated with the principles are very good. So a lot of people wanting to take some lanes to convert to cycle space. And I think that's a really smart thing to be thinking about, because it is the movement, that is still movement that we are requiring. And it also does have the ability to lend some higher place value to the area as well as retaining movement. So these are good things. Yeah, so an interesting one here that's come in, or a couple of times it's been mentioned, to start really extending those pedestrian fences to really stop all pedestrian crossing. Now, this is an interesting example because that will get us better alignment with safe system principles if we really fence off the pedestrians from crossing and make them all go up the overpass and down. But so we will get better alignment with safe system principles, and spot on, because the exposure of pedestrians to vehicle crashes is down. What it will do is erode your place value. And remembering we are trying to achieve this high place value as well. So it does slightly conflict with our movement and place categorization here in this vibrant streets category. So what would actually be more aligned here would be to remove the pedestrian overpass and create safer at-grade crossing and permeability of the area for pedestrians, because of that high place value that we just attributed to it. The presence of the idea of fencing and making pedestrians go up and over is far more attuned to the next category we want to look at, which is that really high movement category, low place value category. Yeah, so I'm just reading through a few others which are really good. A lot of similar themes. A lot of people thinking really now clearly on that exposure likelihood and severity, which I'm liking. So important to be doing a safe system assessment. Okay, Luke's asked that question on where do we stand on pedestrian overpasses, limited exposure only if used. Yes, so I think that's a really good point, and I'm actually doing an OSRAP seminar tomorrow around star rating. Anyway, I won't go into that, but the issue we're facing with some of the star rating is that if you put a pedestrian overpass, you only have two choices: is 100% used or 0% used. And we know that, exactly as Luke's rightly pointing out here, that we build them and some people might use them and some won't. So what I tend to do in a safe system assessment with these is make some assumptions or forecast the number of pedestrians that will be using a facility like this, and then the residual amount. So we would alter the exposure of pedestrian crashes a bit based on that. And if you think that everybody will absolutely use it, it's so beautifully designed and their desire line and no challenges with grades or anything like that, you go, yeah, okay, then you might be into that categorization, but you might alter the exposure down a little bit. Yeah, that might be it. I do see often pedestrian overpasses as a very expensive way to still have pedestrian risk, but in some circumstances they're absolutely brilliant and the thing we absolutely should be doing. So just, yeah, case by case. What else am I seeing here? Max, any stand out to you there?
I think you touched on all the major ones. The public transport lane as well, Ken. Not sure if you covered that one yet.
Yeah, so again, a nice way to continue your throughput of people through there in a more efficient way. And again, we can keep the speeds at reasonable levels by moving them there. Let's just have a look again at the artistic impression. And there we go. What are we seeing here? So an interesting sort of transformation of this area. Immediately, you can see it's a nicer place. It has better place value. People trading, interacting, specializing, having a drink and the like. And we've got good movement for cyclists. We've got good movement possibility for pedestrians as well. A nice thoroughfare for them walking, good public transport, and some vehicle through there. So your mix of holistic people and goods, hopefully, you know, some goods are able to get through there is still pretty good. I mean, it's a 40 km/h through the central bit, which often people will look at and say, oh, we've eroded the movement there by that reduction in speed. Yeah, maybe a little bit, but I think you get still great throughput, and in these areas, the signals and the like are going to be disrupting the continuous movement so much anyway that you're not getting a major influence for the travel through time with that speed limit reduction. If you can get a bit more consistency of that traffic flow, you do better. But certainly for other road users, in terms of cyclists being able to go through there, and pedestrians and others, we're in a pretty good state. But I think it's very hard to transition roads, immediately to this. But to have this sort of thing in mind is pretty good. Raising up your intersections and having lower speeds through there is a valuable thing. Any crossing points and raising those. And we see some interesting sort of separated cycle facilities. So Max, do you want to talk a little bit about any cycle facilities?
Yes, I can probably hop into the next couple of slides there, Ken, when we go into the vulnerable road user space. But this is an example of a protected intersection. So making sure that cyclists crossing the intersection are actually provided some degree of separation from general traffic. And interesting that you showed the Caloundra example there by Prue, because there's an example of a protected intersection up in Caloundra in the Aura housing development that they've got developed up there. So they seem to be ahead of the crowd for cycling infrastructure up there.
Okay, interesting one. I'm sure Prue knows it. She probably designed it. So the protected intersections and the like are really examples of areas trying to get us better place value, retain movement, and really consider movement of other road users rather than just passenger vehicles. But the one thing I suppose I wanted to mention again is that a facility like this, in a safe system assessment, I'm going to categorize this as a reduction in the likelihood of crashes involving passenger vehicles and cyclists, not an alteration to the exposure, because I still believe that bicycle rider is exposed to crashes with passenger vehicles, either by a vehicle leaving their road and their lane and striking the cyclist, or turning in front of or out of these different points. but it's less likely that they will be involved in a crash. And the final one, and I will give Max an opportunity to talk after this, once we're into the just touching very briefly on some other specifics with cyclists and pedestrians and motorcyclists. But the movement corridors, now we're into the position where we're making decisions on a distinct movement of people and goods, and recognizing we don't need to provide the place value, or that's not a major requirement. And if it's identified as a traffic route, these are the ones, the big fences, the overpasses can be more appropriate, corralling the pedestrians into crossing at only one spot. Or if it's a cycleway only, same thing, it's a cycleway, that's what it's there for, grade separating from other roads or pedestrian facilities, but we really want to move the cyclists through there as quickly as we possibly can. And getting to urban motorway style thinking, or urban cycleway style thinking as well. Anytime those though do cross, and we do have those conflict points, we don't opt to prioritize movement over alignment with safe system principles. So we still have to look to get our travel speeds within tolerable levels for the key crash types. So this may be where we're having raised intersections, slowing vehicles down, and like these raised intersections, or other ways to do it. Obviously, grade separations and things being a good way to keep the speeds up and separate those road users altogether. Over to you, Max. Have a little chat about cyclists. And
Thank you, Ken. Do you want me to share my screen, or should I just chat off yours?
yeah, you can share yours.
No worries. Does that come through there, Ken?
Yep.
Fabulous. Okay, I'll just get everything sorted. So for cyclists and pedestrians, typically classify these as our vulnerable road users. I'm sure you're familiar with that term. The reason being they don't have that wonderful cage of metal and all the crumple zone within a vehicle to protect them. So certainly much more vulnerable when it comes to collisions. The speeds that we tend to look at within this space, 10% risk there of a severe injury is about 20 km/h impact speed. So just something to note there, the impact speed is not the speed limit. It's not your 85th percentile, that's the actual collision speed. However, we tend to actually use the magical value of 30 km/h as the collision speed, because that relates to the probability of a fatal injury occurring for a pedestrian or a cyclist. So this 30 km/h speed is generally what's applied, because once you get above that speed, that's when things start to really get very, very severe very, very quickly. So if you remember the speed graph, something like that, 30 kilometers is about this area here, where you've got speed along the x-axis and you've got a probability of fatality on the y. So that 30 km/h is generally what we take for what we're trying to manage speeds at conflict points between general traffic and pedestrians and cyclists. Young and old are obviously even more susceptible to injury, being that their bodies are not as mature or they're more frail. Young in particular can be more difficult to see. Children can be hidden behind, roadside objects such as hydrants or vegetation and the like, so they can also be affected by the likelihood. But yeah, generally, we're as a takeaway point from this slide is we're looking to manage those conflict points to speeds of 30 km/h or lower. Some of the infrastructure that we look at within the cycling space is providing these separated treatments, or you may have heard the term Copenhagen lanes. And this is where you've actually got a physical barrier, usually curbing, that protects cyclists from the general traffic. So typically this type of carriageway would have featured the parking lane to be where the cyclists currently are, and then cyclists riding adjacent the parking lane or within the dooring zone. the Copenhagen lane or protected bicycle lane, which is what we're seeing here, it swaps that arrangement. So you've actually got the cyclists riding curbside and then the parking lane gets pushed out. So it kind of changes that carriageway configuration and provides a much safer environment for cyclists. So where you are looking, if on your network you've identified that there is a high movement for cyclists, so it could be a strategic cycling corridor. It could have lots of commuter cyclists within that area. And you've nominated that particular network is where you want to improve connectivity and safety for cyclists. These separated treatments are really the gold standard because they provide a much better level of service for cyclists in terms of safety. The only kind of caveat that I'd put on that is you need to consider exactly what happens at intersections with these protected facilities and also at roundabouts, because it's all too common just to drop off the facilities and then let cyclists kind of fend for themselves as they approach the intersections and roundabouts. So if you are interested in these kind of design concepts, we've uploaded a couple videos as part of the module 3 on Moodle, and that just goes through kind of the Dutch design philosophy towards intersections and roundabouts. A couple of videos there, which are definitely worth a watch if you are interested within this space. But let's have a look at how a roundabout could be considered or something that applies to the safe system thinking. So you can see this is probably not your conventional or traditional approach to treating cyclists and pedestrians at roundabouts. Generally, you'd have curb ramps that kind of drop pedestrians and cyclists down at these kind of locations, and then they cross the legs when they pick the time that's suitable for them or when they feel it is safe. This kind of flips that thinking where you've actually got priority for vulnerable road users at all the legs, which means if you're a cyclist or you're a pedestrian, you can cross there and vehicles have to give way to you. So it flips that priority on its head. Another real significant benefit of this particular design is we're also raising the crossing points. So you can see all these markings here, the piano key markings, that indicates that this pavement has actually been lifted up. And what that does is it ensures that operating speeds throughout this intersection or this roundabout are low for vehicles, meaning if a collision were to occur, we should be achieving for that magical 30 km/h or less collision speed. So that's another really big win about these particular designs. So this example is actually has been constructed. It's in Moray Street. If you are interested in this particular design, we can actually give you access to some footage of and some photos of how this actually looks on the grounds, because it's a fairly bespoke treatment, and it's something to get used more and more and more. However, it's something that we'd like to see more of applied across the network, because it beautifully addresses, as you can see in this diagram here, the likelihood of crashes occurring. Cyclists and pedestrians are raised, so they're easier to see. And also you're reducing operating speeds, so vehicles have more chance to, undertake emergency braking, or there's less of a stopping distance they need to worry about if a pedestrian walks in front of them. And the severity is also reduced, as mentioned, with regards to that speed. So if you are reducing the operating speeds, you are affecting the severity there as well. So these are a really fantastic example of safe system thinking within the vulnerable road user space at roundabouts. When we look at multi-lane roundabouts, now this is just a conceptual design. We haven't actually seen one of these in place, similar to thinking to what was shown on the previous slides. But what we'll actually, I'll show you what's going on here. Imagine this is like a major arterial. It could be 100 km/h speed limit, or 80, fairly high operating speeds. You'll see that the cycle lane is completely off the road, which is a big tick. You certainly don't want cyclists having to merge out in front of the traffic lane at these locations. So they're completely off road. Where they do cross, if we have a look where they cross at the major arterial, so the high speed environment where you've got lots of large traffic volumes, the priority is given to general traffic, okay? So cyclists and pedestrians crossing have to stop, give way to general traffic as they pass through them. On the other leg, and we've just assumed that this leg here, so that the leg on the north and the southern side of this roundabout, that's more of a minor leg. So that could be a local access road. It could be lower volumes and just a lower function of movement as well. So it doesn't have that same necessary throughput of movement at the different legs, at the north and south leg there. So what we see instead is pedestrians and cyclists are assigned the priority, and they can travel straight through there with cars giving way to them. So you've kind of developed this roundabout reflecting on the different movement functions associated with the different legs of the roundabout. So it's got a high movement function, you're keeping the priority assigned to general traffic. We've got a low movement function, you are assigning the priority back to our vulnerable road users and protecting cyclists and pedestrians. So a really big win here. Once again, this is just a functional design, but we certainly promote these kind of things in terms of safe system thinking, and it does a really good job of ensuring that the design reflects the actual strategic objectives of both of the different corridors. I've got another graph here that shows what types of treatments are appropriate for cycling infrastructure in different speed zones or different speed environments. So between a 0 and 30 km/h speed zone, we're looking at actually sharing the lane. So cyclists can claim the traffic lane and they can actually operate within the traffic lane just as another vehicle would. So that's them using these things here. For those that haven't seen them before, those are called sharrows, shared arrow. And that means cyclists, they claim the traffic lane. So it basically means general traffic have to share the lane with cyclists. Between the 30 and 70 km/h speed limits or speed zones, we're looking at relocation of parking and providing separated bicycle lanes. So that first slide that I took you through, which had the Copenhagen treatment, that's generally appropriate for the 30 to 70 km/h. And there's also appropriate infrastructure to bring in off-road bicycle paths within these particular speed zones, as well as anti-dooring lanes. If you haven't heard that term before, not to worry. It's not a prevalent type of treatment that's used, but if you are interested, feel free to send me an email and I'll get you some research as to what that actually means. But just wanted to showcase in these higher speed zones, so 70 and above, we're definitely looking at bringing cyclists completely off-road, well and truly away from general traffic. And if you are looking at influencing your exposure, you'd want to make sure that there's actually a physical barrier in place to shield errant motorists. And what that means is if a vehicle were to run off the road, they can't access the off-road bicycle facility. There'd be a barrier in place there that they would collide with. And then you could look at saying, okay, well then my vulnerable road user exposure score could be affected by that particular intervention there. Next up is pedestrians. Ken, did you want me to keep running through or do you want to hop on to pedestrians?
I'll jump back in and try and finish a few things off just so you can check in and ensure that everybody is good for their assignment. And sorry, just finishing off the assignment from last module, and quiz is all ready and anything's uploaded, but I'll just briefly talk about pedestrians. And we did have a good chat about there about raising pedestrian crossings. And I think that is a really important, just good takeaway is that raised pedestrian crossings are influencing both the the likelihood and severity of crashes. The likelihood and severity of crashes. And even that grade crossing, the pedestrian crossing, probably may not even improve road safety at all in a lot of situations. So just be very cautious of it. Interesting question or comment coming from James around the challenges with when you have a roundabout and a pedestrian crossing and potential congestion associated with vehicles propping and then blocking up the circulating carriageway and the like. And yeah, you do want to use these in your pedestrian areas or pedestrian desire lines and the like. But it was interesting. Port Phillip, which is a local government in Victoria, had they love doing this, and they just have this council policy that we want people walking and riding their bike. So we're okay if it takes them a lot longer to drive their car. So they're really clean with that thinking of that's not our priority through these areas. Anyway, that's a different one. And so these raised crossings are really a wonderfully aligned safe system treatment. But just, I mean, overarching for pedestrians, I think this photo tells quite a story for me, which was, it's quite an old photo now from Adelaide, but there were some people working in the island there, in the electrics and doing bits and pieces, and they were there for a week or so. And this road was 60 kilometers per hour. And when the work zone went in, it went down to 25 kilometers per hour, because that's South Australia's work zone speed limit, for those who don't know. And they put the barriers out as well. And the workers were in there working away, finished their work, and then all the barriers and everything went away. The speed limit went back up to 60. And then about 3,000 pedestrians a day stand in that island and cross the road and the like. And so you sort of look at that and you go, why do we, I mean, we know what sort of safe system is for vulnerable road users, those workers, but we just don't give that, we don't afford that to the general public. Now, some people will say, oh, well, the workers are concentrating on their work, so they won't, be looking at traffic. Reality is the pedestrians are usually concentrating on their phone or intoxicated or the like. So we need to sort of step back into this and start to take some more responsibility as system designers for the travelling public as well. But I think there's circumstances, and we're getting better at it. We see lots of nice protection for pedestrians now in some areas that they're storing, like these ones. Although if you're doing a safe system assessment of a public transport facility, you've got to be aware that the likelihood of pedestrian crashes just goes very high at the point that their mode of transport is coming, because for those from Melbourne, the trams in the middle of the road, and pedestrians will take very high risks to get to that tram. And it's the same on a bus arriving or a train arriving. So we understand that there's a higher likelihood of crashes around public transport stops. So if you're doing a safe system assessment and it's got that public transport facility, factor that in. But we're really excited by, again, our raised intersections providing wonderful protection in terms of reduced speeds, reducing the likelihood with the signals, and the severity with the lower speeds as well if we're raising crossing points. And we see that even on those major arterials, some recent evaluation showing extraordinary reduction in pedestrian trauma of around 60%, even on these high-speed roads where they're only targeting vehicle through speeds in the signalised intersection of 50 kilometres per hour. So in more pedestrianised areas, if you can get those speeds down, you're getting a wonderful results. And just continuing to think about that, slowing vehicle speeds at the conflict points, acknowledging the pedestrian desire line, where they want to be going, and keeping those speeds down. And speed limit reductions overall are going to give us, continue to give us wonderful reductions in pedestrian and cyclist trauma and other trauma as well. But just another example here of the year that the default urban speed limit went from 60 to 50, and you see the significant drop in number of casualty crashes per year there in a pretty wonderful way, just with that regulatory change. Okay, I'm going to finish with motorcyclists and hopefully give you a minute or two at the end to do your quiz for this session, and then we'll pick it all up again next module, and you'll be told exactly how to do your assessment and where it is and what to fill out, and off you'll go. When thinking about motorcyclists, I like to think of the 5 S's for infrastructure for motorcycle safety: sight, surface, signs, strike, and speed. And so that's, can the motorcyclist be seen, and can the motorcyclist see ahead? Is the surface appropriate? Are the signs warning, guiding, informing? What is the strike? So that is, what's the motorcyclist going to hit, or what's going to hit the motorcyclist? And the speed of travel of the motorcyclist and other vehicles. And when we look at those in terms of likelihood as severity, we see the likelihood is the sight, the surface, and the signs. Strike is all about the severity. The crash is happening. How bad is it going to be? And speed's that magical one we keep talking about with both likelihood and severity. Some recent research that has emerged, giving us a bit more detail on the severity of those crashes for motorcyclists and different crash types, with passenger vehicles, with barrier impacts, with surface embankment, trees, posts, and the like. And I'll put the reference to that research down the bottom there if you're interested in a lot more detail. You'll have a pretty good gauge of it, I think, in your safe system assessment from the colourful chart that we gave you early on. You can refer back to these a little bit, but the thing is that motorcyclists are somewhere, from this recent research, sitting a bit above pedestrians and cyclists, but far less ability to withstand crash forces than passenger vehicles. Again, exactly as Max says, because there's no shell to protect. Even with all the helmet and the body armor and the things, not going to get anywhere near the survivable impacts of a passenger vehicle. So sight influences likelihood, and we know motorcyclists are hidden behind objects more than other road users due to their size. So their likelihood of being blocked by sightline impediments is higher. So we're going to sort of factor these sorts of things when we're considering motorcyclists in a safe system assessment. They're smaller, they're harder to see, they're hidden behind trees, behind other vehicles where they're propping. So we get dynamic visual obstruction challenges more with motorcyclists than other road users. So again, when you're filling out what is the likelihood of motorcycle crashes, you'd be thinking about, okay, sight lines for motorcyclists, and blocking. You'd be thinking about the surface that's provided and the likelihood of the surface influencing crashes. And we know motorcyclists lean when they go around a curve or a corner and have 2 small contact patches on the road, and the center of gravity is shifted out. And so we know that any surface defect will be more of a problem for a motorcyclist than any other road user. Cyclists are up there as well, but we call the motorcyclists the canary in the coal mine when it comes to surface defects. They're the first to be killed or seriously injured. So you're looking for these sorts of things as a safe system assessor. What's influencing the likelihood of motorcycle crashes? A steel plate, thinking of it when it's wet, slippery, significantly going to increase the likelihood of motorcycle crash there. And signs. We do have, we know that signs can help motorcyclists a lot. They're quite attuned to signs, warning signs, ways to inform, or particular signs you can get to warn motorcyclists specifically. But correct, consistent signage, again, for motorcyclists is so important in reducing that likelihood of crashes. And the strike. The strike is an interesting one because motorcyclists don't have that protection, but there are some things we can do to reduce the severity of strike hazards. And this is the European motorcycle crash test done at 60 kilometers per hour, where you get a motorcycle dummy and you slide it on a sled and then stop the sled, and the motorcyclist continues, and that's hitting a post, and you can see that the motorcycle dummy is written off, so far beyond anything that can be handled, but with an underrun protection, some sort of rub rail, or well, I'd generally overarching call it underrun protection. The energy is redirected, and that's within survivable limits for actually that particular product. We get good absorption, redirection of energy, and these are really beneficial in trying to manage the severity. Very challenging to manage the severity of crashes for motorcyclists, but there are some things like this that we can do. And of course, the speed of travel is important. How long have I got? I've got a minute. I'll just quickly address wire rope safety barriers and motorcyclists, because often comes up as something people are quite concerned with. This is looking down on a curve. Most motorcycle run-off road crashes are happening on windy, curvy roads. They don't tend to happen on the long, straight highways. Motorcyclists don't tend to fall asleep at the wheel the way car drivers do. So it's very rare to see that run-off road crash for motorcyclists. But on these windy roads, we do see a lot of that. The thing is, you can't put a wire rope safety barrier on a windy curve like this, because it's a barrier in tension. And if you do put a wire rope safety barrier on a curve like this, and you tighten it up, tension it up, the whole barrier system the posts start to bend, and then eventually it just pops into the middle of the road. So we don't use wire rope systems on these popular motorcycle touring routes because we can't. And so there's very, very few incidents of motorcyclists ever coming in contact with wire rope systems. And so just the sheer chance of it is so extremely low. And I always say to the motorcycle community, there are so many far bigger things, that you should be, we should be. I don't know. I'm a motorcycle. I'm licensed. I'm too scared to actually ride on the public road network. But there's far bigger things that need to be addressed and should be addressed. So we shouldn't be, spending all this time on wire rope barrier systems. Anyway, speed. The appropriate regulatory speed limits, or here we see advisory speed limits, consistent advisory speed limits throughout the route, reducing the likelihood, potentially the severity of crashes as well. Regulatory speed limit reductions and the like are very beneficial. The importance of consistency along a route is really big for motorcyclists. I suppose one of the challenges you have in these sort of 100 km/h road environments for motorcyclists is, if we're going from 100 km/h to 80 km/h, our severity still sits in our maximum category, really, because we're still far beyond what could be handled in any crash type for a motorcyclist. So, there's some significant challenges there. Okay, so next session is all about this thing, but over to you, Max.
No, I had nothing to add. Just we've got the quiz at the end of today and a few videos at this module. But yes, that was finished right on time there, Ken. I was just coming to remind you.
Okay, and we'll see a couple of minutes before the session on Thursday for a chance to win a prize. But
that's it. Have a
thanks,
good
everyone.
day.
Bye.
Bye.